Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons.
That's a very good reason.
It's a good reason.
Yeah.
The reason not to pursue it, but I think that's like right?
Yeah.
There's always like interesting problems.
Yeah, I have no
Even though
idea.
I think about leaving, going around, I mean, 5 years now.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 15th TransformGov Talks. For those of you in the room, we've decided to celebrate our 15th birthday by having an unconventional and definitely deliberate room setup. But hopefully that won't make too much of a difference to your enjoyment tonight. I'm Gavin Freegard, one of the organisers of TransformGov Talks and the director of the new State of the Future think tank. And it's wonderful to see so many of you here at the MOJ and online as well. Quick show of hands, who's been to TransformGov Talks before? Welcome back. Hands up if this is your first time. Welcome. We hope you enjoy tonight, and you're back at the next one to put your hands up again. For those of you who don't know, a quick introduction to TransformGov Talks. It's a space for people who care about making government work better. And each event, we have 2 presentations and some Q&A on how to do that from people who are thinking differently or doing things differently in the public sector, or have lessons that we can adopt in the public sector to do things better. We are live streaming and on the record. This comes out of a lot of things like UK GovCamp, One Team Gov, but it's not just about data, digital and tech. We've had people talking about policy design. We've had people talking about public participation and engagement. We've even had a very entertaining history of the National Audit Office. Such a thing does exist. But the very important thing for those of you in the room, on top of all of this, there's also free pizza at the end. So we hope you enjoy that when it turns up. So this is going to work in the following way. You're going to have 2 brilliant presentations. They'll take 25 to 30 minutes each. Our speakers will present for a bit, and then they will take questions for a bit. If you're in the room, you can put your hand up to ask a question. And if you're online or in the room, you can use Slido. That's slido.com, and the code is 2554962. I will flash up a QR code in a few moments for you to scan as well. We'll finish at around 7. For those of you in the room or anyone online who can get down to the MOJ for 7:05, there will be pizza. We will then head to the pub afterwards, which will be the Buckingham Arms. As you can see, we've been going for, this is our 15th event. We've had lots of wonderful speakers. That included James Plunkett at our last event, and we had the team from the Home Office talking about service design and spending review. You can find all of the previous events, audio, video, except where we've had a few technical snafus, on transformgov.org.uk, so you can catch up on all of the events to date there. A huge thanks to our sponsors for making this possible. That's Anmut, Siva, DXW, Holistic Agility, Public Digital, State of the Future, and TPX Impact. They are wonderful, virtuous, public-spirited organisations. And if you would like to join them in sponsoring us and keeping us in free pizza, or you'd like to help us organise, or you'd like to speak or know someone else that should, please get in touch. transformgovtalks@gmail.com. Here comes the QR code bit. If you would like to ask questions, you can get on Slido, either by going to slido.com and entering that code, or you can scan the QR code now. I will talk slowly and pointlessly for a few more moments to give you the time to do that. You can go to slido.com and enter the code 2554962 as well. Everyone's put their phones down. Hopefully you've got that. The next thing for you to scan is you can sign up for our next event already. That'll be in this room again, Wednesday, the 29th of April for our 16th event. We'll have Lisa and Rebecca from the Local Government Association on a future vision for local government. And I think our first former Perm Sec, Jonathan Slater, former Permanent Secretary at DFE, now visiting professor at QMUL and King's College London. So 2 more brilliant presentations to come. Please do come and join us on the 29th of April. I'll flash that up again at the end as well. But turning to tonight, our first presentation will come from the Ada Lovelace Institute. Unfortunately, Lara is unwell, so can't join us tonight. And I do apologise, that leaves us with an all-male lineup, something that we desperately try to avoid. This time around, it was unavoidable, but apologies nonetheless. But I'm delighted to say that we do still have Oliver Bruff, researcher at the Ada Lovelace Institute, talking about their very recent and excellent report, Scribe and Prejudice. I wish I'd come up with that title. exploring the use of AI transcription tools in social care. Once we've heard from Oliver and we've taken questions, we will then move on to our second speaker tonight, and that's Owen Prendeville from the Information Commissioner's Office, all about the ICO's Better Records Together campaign to drive improvements for access to care records. So 2 fantastic presentations in prospect. I'm not going to waste any of your time. I'm going to invite Oliver to come up to the lectern. Thank you very much. Oh, there we go. I'll just use it. Hi everyone, my name's Oliver. I'm a researcher in the Social and Economic Policy team at the Lovelace Institute. A little bit of background on who we are. We're an independent research institute with a mission to make data and AI work for people and society. What that actually means in practice is that we convene diverse voices from across industry, government, academia, and most importantly, the communities most impacted by new technologies, try and gain an understanding of their perspectives and experiences in relation to new technologies. We also conduct our own primary research into the social impacts of AI and data-driven technologies, and then try and use this evidence to inform policy and practice around the use of AI, particularly in public services. The project I'm going to talk about today is our Scribe and Prejudice report. This was a 8-month-long qualitative project looking at the use of AI transcription tools in social care in 17 local authorities in England and Scotland. So we use the term AI transcription tool to refer to a kind of broader family of technologies that allow a frontline worker to automatically generate official records based off of a recorded conversation. It's really important to state up front, I think, these are very much AI tools, so they use 2 AI foundation models, the kind of technology that powers generative AI tools like ChatGPT. The first model is what's referred to as an automated speech recognition model. So this is a model trained on massive amounts of recorded speech that can take a recorded conversation and automatically generate it with the transcript. That written transcript is then fed through into a large language model, so the very similar kind of model to what powers ChatGPT, to restructure the transcript into a different format, potentially something like a Care Act assessment or whatever kind of non-statutory document a local authority might need in social care. They're really popular at the minute. They're being rapidly adopted across frontline public services, particularly in healthcare or social care, where there's a need to document interactions between people drawing on public services generate records, create records about people drawing on public services quickly. And there's also quite extensive workloads and overstretched services in those sectors as well. We focus specifically on social care in our project because it's an area where these tools are being adopted particularly rapidly and also in quite siloed ways across specific individual local authorities. Just to be kind of upfront about our methods, we conducted 39 quantitative interviews, across 17 local authorities, mostly with social workers, but also with senior managers at local authorities, and also experts from industry and academia involved in the production and evaluation of these technologies. We really wanted to understand through these interviews, firstly, what's the impact of using AI transcription tools on care work itself, but then also kind of understand that bigger picture question about how are these tools being procured and evaluated across the care system as well. I will kind of run through our findings and then kind of present what I think are kind of the main implications for public sector AI adoption more generally. Firstly, I think it's really important to state that there is what we found from our conversations with social workers is essentially real bottom-up support for the use of these technologies, specifically in social care. So we had social workers describe these technologies as game changers, that they kind of potentially half the amount of time that social workers spend writing administrative records. Other social workers say maybe that they save 1 to 2 hours of time by using these tools to automate the process of writing a care record. But there's quite either way, across the spectrum from 1 to 2 hours or 50% of their work week, there's a general consensus that these are very largely time-saving tools. The way in which social workers maybe use the time that they save through AI varies quite significantly. So we had some social workers tell us that they primarily see these tools as ways to claw back some work-life balance in a very kind of heavy, in a sector where there's really intense workloads.
So some social workers telling us that for the first time in their career, they can log off at 5 p.m. rather than 11 p.m. at night. Other social workers saying, actually, I couldn't really experience that improvement in work-life balance, but I was able to maybe see more young people or adults who go home and care in a week than I would do otherwise. Also, as well as these quantitative time-saving benefits, there were also qualitative benefits to using these tools. So we heard social workers describe how the fact that they're not having to take notes in face-to-face meetings mean they can be more present in a conversation, and potentially also finding new, because they have more time in the week, they can find new and different ways to communicate with people that they're providing support for. One person described how this was kind of allowed them to provide more holistic care to a child that they were supporting, because they could now, ask more questions about their day rather than just the essential questions that were on a specific local authority's form. So asking about how the day was at school or something like that. So that more kind of like holistic care. Yeah. So essentially, I think before I go on to talk about kind of like some of the kind of broader, perhaps more negative implications of these technologies, I think as a researcher, I have to really emphasize that research participants were largely enthusiastic about these tools in social care spaces. But also important to underline that not everything is working perfectly. So the reason why I spent quite a bit of time discussing the two different models involved in AI transcription tools is largely because we also found quite a bit of evidence of AI-generated inaccuracies stemming from the use of foundation models in AI transcription tools occurring in official care records. So we had instances of AI we had social workers describe anecdotes of AI hallucinations occurring in official care records. Some of these hallucinations are potentially quite serious. So we had one social worker recounting an instance where a AI transcription tool had fabricated an account of suicidal ideation occurring in an adult that they were supporting, and that actually hadn't been discussed in the original conversation that the care record was based off of. Luckily, that particular social worker spotted that instance, was able to correct it, and before it went on to a local authority system. But we also heard instances of kind of other kinds of AI-generated inaccuracies, like random inserting descriptions of kind of what people had for tea or the weather outside or what people's pets were doing into an official care record, when actually what needed to be discussed in that record was quite a violent or problematic argument that was happening at home as well. So more kind of like distracting information being included in these records. And then also several social workers raised the fact that the use of AI to generate care records changes the language in the records that they were using. So within social care, there's quite a strong focus on person-centered language, particularly in children's social care, making sure that care records can be understood by a child when they're read back, and that they feel kind of personal about that child's situation. So several social workers recounted how they felt that their AI-generated care records were using kind of archaic language that doesn't necessarily reflect best practice or present-day best practice when writing about people in the care system. And one social worker felt really passionately about this and actually described kind of like the language used to describe some of her children as horrific. Again, this particular social worker spent a lot of time kind of going through and correcting that language as she was using the tool. I think what makes this problem quite complicated at a national level is the fact that the design and implementation of AI transcription tools currently really places social workers as the final kind of check, or the only check and balance on AI generated errors or inaccuracies. Social workers are really placed in that position of human in the loop, whereby they're the only person doing the checking on official care records before they're placed into the system. And social workers assume that additional responsibility as part of their existing professional ethics in social care, social workers being kind of autonomous professionals that are accountable for their own work. But what we found through our interviews was that this interpretation of what effective in the human in the loop actually looks like varies quite significantly. So some social workers saying that they spent so much time checking and correcting care records, particularly that social worker who was concerned about archaic language in care records. They spent so long correcting these records that they didn't actually experience any time savings from these tools. Other social workers saying it's just a 2-minute process of reading a document and then pasting it into their authority system. So there's a real kind of breadth of interpretation of what human in the loop looks like. We found that was mainly driven by the kinds of training that social workers had received on these tools, the kind of different interpretations of what risks potentially were and what were the appropriate ways to mitigate those risks. And also, as a result of this kind of social workers were aware that interpretations of human in the loop varied a lot. And as a result, they were quite concerned that AI-generated errors were occurring in their colleagues' work and being used, actually, entering into the care system. And we had several anecdotes from social workers whereby senior managers had spotted errors or inaccuracies in care records that they were checking and having to kind of challenge or bring this up with social workers in the local authority. There we go. I think what complicates this picture quite significantly as well is the fact that there is no consensus around where it is or isn't appropriate to use AI transcription tools in social care, but also in public services more broadly. So when we interviewed senior managers at local authorities, what we found was that there's a inconsistent approach to using AI in statutory contexts. So some local authorities had banned the use of AI transcription tools for creating statutory documents that would feed into statutory processes eventually going to court, whereas other local authorities actively encourage the use of these tools across all the different kind of interactions or documents that a social worker would be required to make. So there's kind of a tension there at the local authority level. But we also found in interagency contexts as well, there's quite a lot of confusion. So, for example, in healthcare contexts, AI transcription tools are beginning to be regulated as clinical devices by the MHRA. That kind of regulation and guidance doesn't exist yet in social care spaces. And similarly in the justice sector as well, some police forces have banned the use of AI transcription tools because of concerns around accuracy, particularly in meetings between social workers, the police and children in the care system. And we found that there was a frustration among social workers that they weren't necessarily able to use the tools that they wanted to or use them in the way that they expected in meetings with police forces. Currently, it's up to individual social workers to really navigate these tensions. And as a result, what that's leading to is essentially inconsistent use of these tools by social workers and potentially inconsistent experiences by for people who draw on public services as they access social care, healthcare, or the justice system as well. I think what's stopping necessarily public services from arriving at a consensus about where AI transcription tools are or aren't appropriate is the fact that current evaluations of AI transcription tools largely focus on productivity saving metrics. So obviously local authorities are particularly resource constrained, especially in social care, where adult social care takes up a large proportion of local authorities' budgets. That's kind of creating an incentive, and an understandable incentive at that, to procure AI transcription tools largely with a focus on saving time, creating extra resource to deal with systemic challenges in the care system. And that's then reflected in how these tools are evaluated. More when we were speaking to managers at local authorities, most evaluations focused on establishing a kind of a base measurement of productivity savings, largely as a way of demonstrating value for money as well. Beyond the issue with that is obviously that there aren't then considerations or evidence on the impact of AI transcription tools on care work more generally, or on people who draw on care as well. And this is partly a result of kind of limited resources available to local authorities to conduct evaluations. We found that local authorities who had kind of dedicated technology procurement and evaluation teams were able to kind of include these more qualitative metrics, were able to include children who draw on care in discussions and evaluations about the use of AI transcription tools. But other local authorities who didn't have access to that resource were focusing primarily on efficiency saving metrics, and were also often relying on the vendors of AI transcription tools themselves to do the part of this evaluation, which some interviewees kind of raise as potential conflict of interest as well. So yeah, essentially this lack of evidence really means that it's very hard for local authorities to kind of understand or have a broad picture view about what's the impact of these tools across the care system, what's the impact of these tools on different populations or different contexts as well, which is making that previous point about a lack of consistency on the appropriateness of use of AI transcription tools really difficult for local authorities to solve. So yeah, key takeaways before I kind of move on to questions. I think it's quite clear that AI transcription tools can meaningfully support social workers in managing, what is essentially a really intense workload. And the vast majority of social workers that we spoke to are really keen to keep using these tools after piloting. But as we've seen kind of with the case of AI-generated accuracies or a lack of person-centered language, there is definitely a risk that AI transcription tools have downstream implications on people who draw on care, but also potentially in the wider care system, as well as AI inaccuracies feed into kind of court decisions made about people's lives, and are used as evidence to make decisions. The extent of this risk, or the saliency of this risk, is really hard to establish at the minute, because there is a lack of evaluation of these tools in social care. And kind of in the report, we make kind of several suggestions around how to go about solving this problem. And primarily what we argue for is dedicated resourcing for the evaluation of AI transcription tools, and a way for central government to kind of support the local authorities in conducting their own evaluations, collating that evidence and disseminating it as well to different decision makers. I'll stop there and open up for questions, I think.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed. And again, a reminder that you can use Slido. It's slido.com, and the code is 2554962. I'm going to start in the room. Remember, we are on the record, but do tell us who you are and where you're from if you can. And please wait for me to come with a tiny microphone for you to speak into. I've got a question there. Any other hands? I'll come to Alex first, and then I'll come over there next.
Alex Blanford, Public Digital. You mentioned there that you also interviewed some of the vendors, because one of the things I think is interesting about this is, over 15 years, the things that have been biggest predictors of problems, especially with child social care, social work, have been multi-agency collaboration and things being missed when they jump the boundaries between different institutional cultures. If you have something that cannot make a judgment call on whether something is important and emphasizes what somebody had for tea rather than violence or abuse, does that need evaluation? That, to me, that sounds like an enormous red flag for something that's been marked again and again and again and again. So when you spoke to the vendors, what was their understanding of those sorts of challenges, and do they understand? Do they have a way of working towards sort of fixing those sorts of problems?
Yeah, I think what's important to say is that those were kind of anecdotal instances that occurred kind of infrequently. So when we spoke to vendors, the sense was that there's a risk of AI-generated inaccuracies, but they don't happen frequently. And when they do happen, it's essentially they happen so infrequently that it's a reasonable ask of social workers to spot them, and that it's part of kind of social workers' ethical obligations that they kind of sign up to, through kind of the existing principles in social care, for them to be able to spot these records. I think we have a quote in there, essentially social workers owning the records, very much like it's a tool for social workers to use, and it's on them to check their work. What I think we find is that that kind of human in the loop approach isn't necessarily robust enough to catch all errors.
So I'm just going to do a very quick technical change, which nobody's noticed. I've been very, very subtle. And I'm going to bring the next question over there, but please do keep thinking. We have got more time for questions.
Thanks. Great presentation. Thank you. In the findings and the conclusions you got, what kind of scope did you see in the future for the fine-tuning or customization of these models, as in training them on data or information that local authorities already have, as a way to kind of get past some of the inaccuracies, or particularly the point you mentioned about not using specific language, like child-centered language, for example? That seems like something you could partially mitigate through fine-tuning, but I was wondering what kind of scope there seemed to be in the research for that.
I think there's quite large scope for that, actually. So in the interviews that we had with social workers, kind of two tools were most common. Firstly, Microsoft Copilot, which isn't kind of adapted for social care, isn't fine-tuned. It's kind of just the base Copilot tool you get through a local authority subscription. And then there's also Magic Notes as well, which is a tool developed by Beam. Yeah, exactly. So that's obviously specifically designed for social care. It uses local authority templates to kind of create specified documents for specific to the local authority. There is scope potentially for further adoption, like fine tuning, and that I think Magic Notes is fine tuned on social care specific data, and is quite adaptable for for specific local authorities as well. We found social workers were generally more pleased with Magic Notes than Copilot. I think we did have some in our sample that had used both tools and they preferred Magic Notes. So that customization does help.
Great. I saw a hand there, Did I see one back there? I'm not sure I did. I'm going to go over there first and make life difficult for myself by running halfway across the room, and then we'll take one from there.
So I'm Julianne from the ICO, and Dec was as well. I think my first question about any efficiency is if I know anything about social work, if there's any space, they'll just put more cases in. So I don't believe there's any efficiency whatsoever. They'll just have 3 more cases a week or whatever it is. But actually, and this is my slightly more negative thing about social workers, did anyone check what social workers were writing before they were using AI? And actually, if this was any more or less efficient? Because I would imagine you get a massive difference in notes that will be written. And if you sent 2 people out, they would probably come back with quite different notes. Yeah. So I think before just deciding what AI is doing right or wrong, it might be quite interesting to see that as well, basically, and compare the difference. And I was also, this is slightly more ICO, what's happening to the original transcript? Where is that being kept as well? I think would just be quite interesting to know on that, because that never gets kept.
Yeah.
When a human does it, only the summary does.
Yeah, on the sorry, so your second question.
So I think I said a little bit about comparing it.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, and how good the quality is, and the original transcript I would suggest that it will be efficient.
Yeah. So on the efficiency point, I think that really depends on the local authority. So some local authorities had kind of specifically said, we are adopting this tool because we want social workers to have a better work-life balance. So we're not allocating any more cases to social workers. We did find some social workers from that particular local authority experienced an improvement, that kind of improvement. We also interviewed social workers who were quite frustrated with the fact that actually, yes, we are just having more cases allocated to us. And also one social care manager who was thinking about kind of establishing quotas on the amount of people that a social worker should meet each week now that they have these tools. So kind of adopting the complete opposite to the work-life balance approach by using these tools to kind of see more people more often. On the question of kind of what's the baseline or status quo approach to making the social care notes, yeah, it's not great, obviously. There's a lot of inconsistencies. And I think one thing that came through from our research is that it's social workers who were more attuned to kind of the need for person-centered language in care records. We're going to raise that as an issue, and then social workers who maybe weren't attuned to that as an issue, or maybe weren't involved in kind of some of the organizations that are kind of advocating for that in social care, didn't necessarily see that as an issue. So there's potentially this broader kind of systemic challenge of how do we level up social care across different local authorities. And then it also ties into that evaluation point as well, because something that came up very frequently in conversations with managers is this idea of how do you establish kind of an effective baseline for an evaluation when there's very little understanding of kind of people's experience of social care more generally as well.
Thanks. I'm going to take a quick online question and then the final one in the room. The online question is from James Cattell. Evening, James. Lots of public sector organisations want guidance on using artificial intelligence. Where would you point them, please?
I really can't say anything that people probably aren't already aware of, like the AI playbook for government, kind of like the existing DSIC kind of guidance and regulations. I think what we found from our research is that guidance is there's quite large gaps in guidance. Specific guidance for procurement, for example, we've done a project on the procurement of AI tools more broadly across local government, and there is kind of like a lack of kind of clarity on definitions and key concepts, even potentially a lack of clarity on what AI actually is across different documents. So I think that's that's a problem.
Thanks. I'm also going to recommend, we did a previous TransformGov talks with the GCS Assist tool, who have some really interesting supporting frameworks and evidence as well. But I'm going to give Dave the final question.
It's not actually me, it's actually another question from online that someone's put into the chat. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to read this out verbatim. Hello from Emmanuel Andrews, who is a digital rights and tech policy from the Digital Rights and Tech Policy Organization Glitch. They say, we take a racial and gender justice lens to our work. I was struck by what you said regarding different local authorities invariably having dedicated tech and procurement teams, and that some are better than others. Is there a risk that some local authorities are derogating from their obligations under the Equality Act or the public sector equality duty?
Really good question. I don't necessarily know about deviating from their obligations under the Equality Act, but there is definitely a risk that AI transcription tools perform differently for different groups of people. So there's a lot of academic research out there showing that the automated speech recognition model that makes up the first half of an AI transcription tool performs differently for people who speak differently, so different accents, potentially people with speech impediments as well. There's different performance there. In our interviews, what came out was that people from Scottish local authorities were quite frustrated with performance of people with Scottish dialects, for example. And then also on the summarization of a transcription into a care record as well, there's definitely a risk of kind of, what a lot of people refer to as bias in that process as well. So there's a really good paper by an academic from LSE called Sam Rickman, who kind of did a large study of different large language models' ability to summarize care records from adult social care. And he found that AI large language models systematically downplayed women's care needs compared to men's. So there's kind of essentially quite a large risk of bias coming in there as well.
Great. Well, Oliver, thank you very much
Yes,
indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And while I subtly plug the laptop back in, which nobody noticed, I'm going to hand over to our second speaker tonight, and that is Owen. And this isn't going to work. Sorry. I think we have the answer to whether your video is going to
Yeah, no, that's quite all right. Yeah, that's breaking the first rule of slide decks is don't try anything fancy and introducing videos, etc. Hello, everyone. I'm Owen Prendeville. I'm a group manager at the ICO, and I've been fortunate enough to work on a project that we've been running for a couple of years, which culminated in December in Better Records Together, which I'm going to talk to you briefly about today. I don't think that the video is not going to work. There was going to be a video on the next slide, which featured Jackie and another care experienced person and advocate alongside a couple of ICO staff, including the Information Commissioner. And they put into words, I think, why the access to records process, some of the challenges around it, is such an important matter. It's why we've kind of been looking into it for a period of time, and why we've ended up doing this work. I've left this quote at the start of the presentation. I think it's a really powerful quote. Jackie speaks incredibly well about her own experience, and also more broadly why social care records can matter, the kind of biographies of people's time and care, and in some cases really kind of really important information to help shape someone's identity that they don't always get access to see. And another reason I like this quote, and it's interesting, obviously we've had the presentation from Ada tonight looking at the social work perspective, and our project has interacted with social workers, but it's probably primarily interacted with information governance practitioners on one side, and the experiences of people who have been in care trying to access their records on the other. Now, it's not always as kind of one side pitched against the other as that, but I think that quote also kind of reflects that point, that there's two people involved in that process. And actually, as much as Jackie speaks very, very powerfully about her own experience and some of the negative aspects of that experience, it's also a really, really difficult job for the practitioners who have to deal with these records. And we're going to kind of come onto that in some detail. Right, I'm going to try and navigate some slides without playing videos that are going to echo. Can we see? You know,
You won't get sound.
I won't get any sound.
We will share a link to this after the event. as
Definitely
well.
go and have a look afterwards. There we go, that's that done. Somehow more somber with standing in silence having that on, but it is a really, really powerful video, and I would recommend if you get some time, only just under 2 minutes, to go and have a look. And that was the culmination of the project that we undertook in this space. Better Records Together only became a thing in about October of 2025, but this project started all the way back in 2022. Lucky for you, you get to hear the history of that today. So if you don't know who we are, we're the data protection regulator in the UK. We regulate various bits of legislation. The one everyone will be familiar with is Data Protection, Data Protection Act, GDPR, rules around direct marketing, and also freedom of information, and so on and so forth. And I'd be remiss not to go back to James's question in the previous session and mention that that includes things like artificial intelligence, and indeed we've produced quite a lot of guidance on how to navigate data protection rules around artificial intelligence, including we did sort of joint work with the LGA around procurement. So anyway, for James and anyone else who's interested in that side of things, that's probably worth noting as well. We regulate the handling of all personal information, which is quite a challenge. It's everything in every corner of the economy, including all public sector use of information. There is a quirk in the kind of care system, which is that we regulate any personal information in care and adoption records. So for example, and we did actually fine a charity in either 2024 or 2025 for destruction of adoption records. So all organizations are responsible for handling them in a responsible way, but we don't oversee access to adoption records. And I won't go into all of the intricacies and quirks and what that implies and whether that's a good or a bad thing today, because we don't have time. Catch me in the pub afterwards if you want to get my kind of off the record thoughts on that. But it is a quirk, and there's quite a disparity there, and people who have been adopted but want to learn more about their identity and reasons behind that are contained within records have a quite different experience. So I thought I'd just mention that. The ICO project, as I mentioned, started several years ago at quite a small scale, it must be said, but effectively it started because a group of care experienced young people between the ages of, I think, roughly 18 and 25 approached us in the Scottish Parliament. They brought together, it was a really, really kind of impressive presentation where they gathered a number of major institutions, the ICO was one of them, and kind of set out a quite blistering set of criticisms about how they'd been treated, whether in the care system, and also how their information had been handled, whether it be breaches, data being shared that they weren't happy with, the access to records. And instead of the ICO, we had a really unempathetic complaint system, that we didn't do enough in this space. And we kind of took that away, and over a long, long period of time, it didn't happen overnight for sure, but we've taken that criticism and huge amounts of intelligence, that some of which we already had and some of which we built over a period of time, and eventually come with a reasonably significant regulatory response. We held some introductory workshops in 2023 that kind of started to build some of our contacts and a bit of our understanding. I think very quickly, myself and a couple of others who started this work at the ICO became kind of aware that the scale of the challenges facing the the system. We've heard some of them today in a different context, but there are huge pressures on the social care system. I think everyone in this room probably recognises that, and this is just one aspect of that, but it is a really, really significant one. 2024 was our research year, if you like. So we carried out a survey with for care experienced people where we had a really, really good response rate, got loads of really rich data about the challenges people were facing, the impact it was having on them, and so forth. And 2025 was about, and then we worked with practitioners after that point to understand why they were struggling in many ways to provide the service that the care experienced people were hoping to receive. And then 2025 is about designing a regulatory response and approach to this work, which I'll go into in later slides. I won't dwell on these too much. The slides will all be shared, and obviously people can look at it online afterwards. But some more quotes. We've really tried in the hub and in the publications that we've done around this work to make sure that the voices of those who have actually had experience of, not just in care, but of trying to access their records and all of what that means for them is kind of littered throughout our work. If you read our guidance, we kind of quite very deliberately have it within our guidance to emphasize why this matters, why it needs to be taken so seriously. I also really like the quote from Dr. Jim, and one point, because I feel like I will focus on some of the barriers and the challenges today, but accessing someone's care records can also be a really, really positive experience for people. And indeed, in our survey responses, 1 in 5 people found the experience either wholly or partially positive. So I'm conscious that I focus a lot on the barriers, but these can be really kind of transformative experiences for people. It's just that also there are some really negative aspects to it, unfortunately, based on how it is being done. So what do we find? So from our research survey with care experienced people, we found that the first list is a set of some of the barriers. Delays was not a surprise to us. We knew there were massive delays in the subject access process with local authorities. We have a long history of engagement in that space. Some of it is softer, some of it's tougher in terms of kind of formal regulatory enforcement action. But we knew about the delays. The communication, I think, is a really interesting one. And it's something that, again, we've tried to address when we've done our guidance, because there is a very, very clear legal requirement that you have to, in theory, not in theory, in the law, you have to provide a subject access request response within a particular time frame. And if you don't do that, there could be consequences, regulatory action, or what have you. But poor communication is a little bit harder to kind of quantify. But what we were seeing was that it was having equally, and if not sometimes an even greater impact on people's experiences of trying to access their records. The second bullet, again, and I think to some extent the third bullet, says two things. One, it goes back to the original point that these records really make a difference to the people that are trying to request them, and that lots and lots of people were having experiences that were either negative or that left lots of questions unanswered for them. Then the final bullet was another really important one for us when we were considering our regulatory response. So there were loads of stats, some of them are on the screen, and there are many more in our research report, which you can read in full on the hub. Lots of people were really unhappy with either the experience or the final result in terms of the records they received, or both. And yet only a fraction of those people escalated those complaints. Now, again, there are lots of reasons behind that, but it told us that as a regulator, this was something that was in our purview. It was something we had oversight for, but we could not rely, and in fact, it would be wrong to expect the only way we would be able to, say, gather intelligence and to have oversight and deal with this challenge would be via a complaints process, by expecting care experienced people to come through what can be quite a bureaucratic process all the way to the ICO and then get something to be done about it. We needed to be much more proactive. So that will hopefully make sense later on when I talk about our interventions. Practitioners on the front line, and I don't think this is necessarily entirely unique, but I think it's probably particularly true in this sector, really, really recognize a lot of what I've just said at the start about why these records matter to people. So we're not dealing with a set of practitioners who are kind of entirely frustrated that they have to deal with what are really, really complex and difficult records. A lot of them are kind of tearing their hair out thinking, we're not doing a good enough job here, but there's nothing more we can do. And they identify there in some of the bullets some of the reasons why they struggle. Resources and just general workload is the absolute number one. That's, again, not a massive surprise, but it's difficult to understate how significant the pressures are, not just in volumes of total requests, but sometimes these requests run to tens of thousands of pages. And it's really, really challenging to go through, in theory, all of that and make kind of individual decisions about what information to release to people. Also, challenges about how to apply the law. So redaction was actually a massive part of the challenges around information records being provided to people, and practitioners were really struggling in terms of how to get that right. And again, that phrase "if in doubt, take it out" was something we heard a number of times throughout our research. And it's a really kind of sensible information governance phrase in many contexts. But I always took away it was a really damaging phrase in this context, because of course taking it out might mean kind of denying someone information about really key moments in their childhood. So all of these kind of challenges that we saw from practitioners that were leading to the types of outcomes that care experienced people told us they were facing. And just to summarize, I think what I've gone through there, that clearly this process had profound impacts on people. We talked about the delays. We knew timeliness was a problem. We knew kind of pure compliance was a problem, but that was by no means going to solve the issue. Good practice, or bad practice, as was often the case, needed to be addressed in our regulatory response. And it's a little bit more complicated for us to address as a regulator, because it is much easier for us to say the law says X, and if you don't do it, there are kind of clear and obvious levers available to us. It's a little bit more complicated when it's on the issues of good and bad practice. And that final point, that we couldn't be purely reactive. We had to do something much more on the front foot. And it wasn't simply about saying to frontline practitioners, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing a better job? They were really struggling. So what was our response? This summarizes some of the key things that we did, and you'll be able to see more detail on the hub on our website. So we provided more information for care experienced people. There's a genuine need to kind of continue to provide that information. People can better understand their rights. There's also an element of this about helping to manage expectations, to be kind of clear and open about what people can and can't expect. So there's one stat which for me has lots of different implications, but it was, I think, 39% of people who had their records redacted in our survey response had no idea that was going to happen. Now, for anyone, if there are any other information governance professionals or people who have worked in that space before, that isn't necessarily unusual in a lot of SARs. But you can imagine if you were kind of told that effectively your life story is going to be contained in, say, a box that ends up on your doorstep, and 10,000 of the 12,000 pages are fully redacted, that could be, it could have a really profound impact on you. And something as simple as, and it goes back to the better communication that we talked about at the start, something as simple as letting someone know that will happen, why it will happen, how they can challenge it, we thought was a really kind of core and important part of our response. Care record standards. So this is our guidance, if you like. When we spoke to practitioners, unsurprisingly, they wanted more guidance from us, and that's fair enough. We didn't have as much specific guidance as I think we needed to. But I didn't want to simply produce guidance which said apply the third-party exemption, or it said you must respond to a SAR within 30 days. Now, in full disclosure, it also says those things, but it says lots more about the ways in which we want you to interact with these records, the fact that we want you to recognize the impact that this information can have on someone. And luckily, the legislation, at least partly, backed us up in this space. So, the legislation, for example, around third party, talks about the importance of the information to a requester. And so there are factors there that you can take into account. And I think we, as much as we could, tried as a regulator to say, and here's the emphasis we want you to place as you go through the life cycle of a care record. As part of that, we also made a call to action for senior leaders. Obviously mentioned resourcing several times. This was never going to be solved kind of purely through frontline practitioners. They need the support and resource in terms of often in terms of simply kind of staff numbers at the front line. But these requests are kind of so significant in terms of time taken. And linked to that, so there's a kind of positive call to action, absolutely, but linked to that is a supervision pilot. And we've worked with 19 organisations who handle care records. We're still working with them. We're going to publish our results in kind of June, July time, where we are putting pressure on them and saying, you need to do better with your performance, otherwise bad things will happen in a kind of simplistic way. So it was about hopefully bringing together a set of measures rather than thinking there was one silver bullet to solve this, and each of them try and put pressure on the other to ultimately affect the behaviour change of addressing some of those challenges that we went through in the research. And this is what it looks like. It's I think a really effective piece of work. Huge numbers of ICO colleagues ended up kind of being part of it and kind of contributing to that. And do have a look at the video and have a read of the research. just to touch on some of the takeaways from a kind of TransformGov perspective, the second bullet point should be obvious, but I don't know if that is always the case in lots of kind of public sector policy work. But we took real time building up an evidence base. I've not gone into all of the detail now, but the project team were really confident by the time we got to designing interventions that we knew what some of the major challenges were. And in doing that, we had to keep people informed over time. So Jackie and John George and lots of the people who had given us their really kind of rich and powerful lived experience, we've been speaking to those people for several years now, and sometimes it's very easy to think, well, what on earth are you delivering as a regulator? But I think we're able to kind of build that trust because we showed them that we were taking the time to really understand the challenges and design a response which was going to at least attempt to address them to slowly make things better, rather than kind of rushing in and thinking, right, we'll just do one thing and we'll move on to the next. Sometimes targeting culture and behavior is just as important as strict compliance. I think that's massive. I think culture is almost always more significant than the kind of strict rules, processes, and procedures, even as it relates to those. That was a big thing. And just the final bullet is really best to say that there is hope that there can be significant improvements in the system, but there is still lots of work to be done. I feel like I've probably talked on a lot, so I'll just say that there is more to come. Again, ask me some questions, come and speak to us in the pub. But AI, as nicely segued into tonight's other speaker, AI is a big focus for us in 2026. We want to get under the hood a bit more and see if there is anything we need to do more as the ICO to support practitioners in that space. I'll leave it there.
Owen, thank you very much. We've got time for questions. Again, if you're online or in the room, you can use slido.com 25 54 962. I have a hand up already, so I'm going to take the first question from the room. I'll come around the back.
Thank you, Gavin. I feel like the next question should be the opposite end of the room, just to really get your steps in today. Owen, great presentation. Fabian Cheswell, Policy in Practice. You talked about the difficulties getting health boards and local authorities disclose records to the care experienced individual. We work with multi-agency safeguarding trust to get them to share, and it's difficult to get them to share data even amongst themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I wondered if the ICO had looked at that and even supporting words to say you really should find a way to do this, rather than a current like watch out laws about. I'd love any thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I've got many thoughts. I've probably got definitely more thoughts than I've got time for. I think, and this is not based on empirical evidence, this is my experience. I've been at the ICO for 8 years, which is just before GDPR came into force. And I think GDPR did a lot of really, really good things. I also think it terrified a lot of people that fines are going to be coming around the corner. And I think both the example of multi-agency working and data sharing, which is a massive challenge, and things like this are some really, really powerful examples of where the policy intent of GDPR and some of that kind of strengthening of data protection legislation have done lots of really, really good things. But I think culturally have had some significant knock-ons. To answer your question, again, let's exchange details later, and because we've done some really significant work on data sharing, particularly in emergency situations. It gets a little bit more complicated once the kind of immediate urgency of data sharing scenarios comes out of it. It becomes a little bit more hard work. But interestingly enough, actually, a set of local authority designated officers who obviously play that multi-agency role got in touch with us off the back of this project and had some of those same conversations. So we've done some bits of work there. So there's stuff we can link up. But I do think it's actually very much linked to the same thing. It is that cultural fear that the ICO is coming over the hill with a giant hammer in the form of a £17 million fine, which we've basically publicly stated in the public sector is only going to be reserved for very, very rare cases. We're much more interested in trying to encourage people to do the right thing and then reserving a stick for when it doesn't go wrong. And in this case, we try to do a bit of both, which really the stick was about you cannot leave people waiting for months and months, and in many cases, years and years for their requests. But what we want to do, and this is hard to do, what we want to do is give people a bit more freedom and breathing room to have the confidence to disclose information if they think that's the right thing to do. So they've got to document their reasons and so on and so forth. But I think it's probably fair to say, based on our research, that at the moment, too much stuff's being redacted. I want less stuff to be redacted. That's the really simple way of doing it. It's really hard to get there, but that's part of the mentality behind what we've done in this work.
Thank you. We've got time for some more questions. Any more hands in the room? Got another one there.
Thank you very much. This is really interesting. I was wondering how this has played out within ICO. Have there been other parts of ICO that have like taken this quite proactive, quite user-led approach to how to kind of approach a complex problem like this?
That's a really good question. And as someone who works in public affairs, I feel like I should have a more ready answer for you. The safeguarding stuff I think is very similar. Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't say things I'm not sure I'm allowed to say there. Well, so one example is that the supervisory approach we've taken in this case, that kind of proactive, and what we've done is basically we've reached out proactively and we've tiered based on your performance. I mean, it's reasonably simple, but it's worked really well, and it's based on a Scottish pilot that we did. So for anyone who's not familiar, Scotland is, I think it's fair to say, further along in the kind of social care setting than much of the rest of the UK. And they introduced the redress scheme a number of years ago, and it led to an absolute explosion in subject access requests. So local authorities suddenly swamped with requests. And so we did this proactive approach, and I think the stats somewhere buried on our website, but effectively we saw really significant improvements across the board by doing some quite simple things, but very proactively and saying, right, give us your stats, quarterly basis, right, where are you up to? And then tiering them, meetings with chief executives. It's a wonder what you can achieve when you get a senior person in a room and kind of grab them and say, right, this needs to be improved with a side of, and it also really, really matters to the people who are involved. Ripple effect, that's another great example. Yeah. So we launched a piece of work which is now years down the line, interesting enough. So we did this piece of work which came off the back of the National AIDS Trust. To give a shout out to them, they raised concerns with us and said, again, complaints process isn't working for people who've had their HIV status inappropriately disclosed. We did some work with them. We expanded it as well to people who were victims of domestic abuse, who had information about their whereabouts and so on, disclosed to someone who they didn't want it disclosed to. And we knew really there the problem was about how people were dealt with after a data breach had happened. There were, again, loads of mechanisms to stop data breaches, but there isn't much legal mechanism for treating people like human beings after data breaches happen. And so what we did is we basically kind of put it into the faces of organizations, senior leaders, data controllers, information governance people, and said, this is the impact it can have on people. We've got some really powerful slides in that case, and people might have to leave home and so on and so forth. And again, so we've worked that campaign for a number of years now, and it's now being rolled out across the civil service. I don't know how much the disparity between just information governance teams or more broadly, but that again, we knew it was a really important issue. We knew people who were going through really, really traumatic events as related to their data were being kind of let down, but it wasn't as simple as waving our traditional regulatory sticks. So that's another example. I'm sure there are others that will come to me afterwards.
Great, thank you. I can probably squeeze in one final, very quick question if we've got any. Otherwise, I might ask a quick one, and it sort of comes through in that answer, and it definitely came through in the takeaways for TransformGov, which is quite an unusual project for a regulator to run in many ways. What would you say to other regulators who are maybe tackling some complex challenges and might be thinking of trying to do something differently? What would your advice be?
I honestly feel like one of my number one pieces of advice is patience, and I mean that as much on a personal level as on a regulatory level, to be honest, because myself and the co-lead on the project, we worked on this reasonably in the background for quite a long period of time. You can look at that either ways. I think we weren't kind of gripped by the organization to say, right, you need to deliver something in 6 months. And some people might view that as a negative because we have taken a number of years on this project. But because we were given that time to, as I say, build the evidence base and build the kind of the network that we've been able to establish, it means that we can very quickly go to people and say, right, here's an element of the project. So for example, when we built the guidance, we co-created it with local authority practitioners, with care experience people, with advocacy groups, with and real kind of experts in the space. We've collaborated with the UCL, do great academic work in this space. We've got really good connections there. We've only been able to do that over time, and we had the same thing with I think internally to some extent with our senior leadership. We were kind of, right, here's what we're doing, and they let us get on with it for a period of time. We kept updating them, and then, and I mentioned we got to kind of October last year, and we've been writing all this stuff and consulting for ages, and it felt like it came together out of nowhere. And the name Better Across Together barely existed in October, and then obviously project launches, but it's because there was years of work underpinning it that got us to that point. So yeah, be bold, and this is still grounded in our regulatory objectives. There's a massive amount of data protection harms being caused by this process, so it's our job, as far as I'm concerned, to improve that. So it's not as if the work is grounded in what is the way we can fundamentally affect behavior change and improve the situation. So yeah, that's my answer.
Owen, thank you very much indeed. I've got a few quick parish notices, and for those of you in the room, I will keep them quick. I am the only thing between you and the pizza. That's not actually true. I think there's a Deliveroo driver that might be between you and the pizza as well, but we will get there shortly. A few things, some of us involved in TransformGov and others in the civil service policy profession, particularly the policy design community, are thinking of holding something called Policy Camp, an unconference for policymakers and others later this year. Please do go to the website, policycamp.org.uk, or some more QR codes, because why not bring back a very retro technology and get you to scan them with your phones. Various other things going on. So National Conversations, that is a campaign to deliver some books about digital transformation to every new member of the Senedd and every new member of the Scottish Parliament after the next election. They've got lots of events coming up as well, so please do go to nationalconversations.org. Derek Alton, who's one of the founders of TransformGov, is currently travelling the world finding public sector reformers. Go to civicpunks.com. I run an event series called Data Bites. There's more information to come on that shortly. Go to public.digital/data-bites-series for more information on that. We will share all of these in an email after the event as well, so don't worry about frantically scribbling everything down. And I think UK Charity Camp, which is a big unconference, is coming up again soon. I also chair the conferences for Think Digital Partners. We've got some of those coming up, which are free if you are working in the public sector, including Think AI for Government on the 22nd of April. State of the Future, My Society, and various other organisations are currently wondering what a freedom of information network might look like. We have an online workshop at midday next Wednesday, the 1st of April. It is not an April Fool. You would be an April Fool to miss it if you're interested in FOI. So please do come along to that. I mentioned that we've got the LGA speaking next month. They've got an event tomorrow night that is all about local government 2040. Where did the future go? You can sign up to that on the LGA website. And at Kinship Works, we're doing various things to help map public sector reform networks and the disciplines of civic renewal. Go to medium.com/kinship-works if you might like to help us populate that. Goodness me, that's exhausting. Right, nearly there. Again, please do sign up for our next event. We'll have the LGA and Jonathan Slater back in this room on Wednesday, the 29th. Be great to see lots of you there. If you'd like to help organise, if you'd like to speak or know someone who should, or if you'd like to give us some money for pizza and better tech, you can email us at transformgovtalks@gmail.com. You do a fantastic job with the tech, Dev. I want to give you some better equipment to do it with. If you'd really like to help us out, one thing that you can do, just tell someone how much you enjoyed the brilliant speakers tonight and what maybe an insight that you took away. There was plenty that I took away from tonight's presentations. Do encourage them to sign up to our mailing list. You can find that on our website, transformgov.org.uk. Do sign up because we might have an event to publicise that we haven't talked about yet. I'm hoping for some good news, or should I say newyddion dda, about that over the next few weeks. So stay tuned on the TransformGov website. All that remains for me to say are some huge thank yous. A huge thank you again to all of our sponsors and to the MOJ for putting us up. To all of you for coming and the brilliant questions, and for all of you joining us online. And please do join me in a huge thank you to our brilliant speakers tonight, Oliver and Owen. Thank you very much indeed. Excellent. There is some pizza appearing outside, so please do hang around and help yourselves, and we'll head to the Buckingham Arms afterwards as well.
You forgot how to